Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. How are you doing today, Stephen?
Pretty good, Jeff. Scouring the internet for different landlord articles and content that I often do, and I came across another good one by a Bigger Pockets contributor, Michelle Fisher, who is a duplex investor. Looks like she's from Washington, and she gave a great tip on a blog article that she had up recently, and it's not something I've heard of a lot of landlords doing, and I thought it was well worth some time on a podcast episode here because it's a tip that I think that every landlord can start implementing with any new leases, and it is a great strategy to combat losses that you suffer after somebody breaks a lease. And so in this case, she requires a 1 year lease term, and she runs into situations where people are there for a couple of months and they leave, and as any landlord knows, they can leave 5 months left on the lease, but it doesn't mean that they're going to pay you for 5 months rent. It's very rare that you're ever going to get anything, especially if you take it to court. You're usually looking at no more than 2 or 2.5 months worth of rent that a judge will allow for.
Right.
So what she does is she adds a clause to her lease agreement, and people agree that they can basically earn 10% of their deposit back every month of their vacancy. So in order for them to be able to get 100% of their security deposit back, they have to be there for 10 months. So in the example that she gives, she had somebody who left 2 months early, which means they forfeited 80% of their security deposit. Since they were there 2 months, 10% each month was 20%. So she was obligated to give them back 20% of their security deposit. And the other 80%, the landlord kept and used as funds that helped with the turnover. And in this case, she said that there was no loss on a broken 10 months of a broken lease, and getting somebody else in there. So I thought that was incredible, and a great way to reduce the losses that landlords take when you're dealing with somebody who vacates early.
Yeah, very much so. One of the things that she does talk about in the article is that this is for people who leave it in good shape. So if there is damage or are things that would normally come out of a security deposit, she still takes that money as necessary. But this is just an incentive for them to stay and get the entire security deposit back because they've been there long enough to meet the minimum time requirements. And normal disclaimers. I don't know what the legalities of this would be in all of the 50 states, but it would be something to be sure that you check with an attorney in your state on, just to be sure that there aren't any laws against this. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I've been on the other side of landlords trying to collect on past due rent or broken leases, and anybody who's been through it knows that that money's gone. And in this case, she would have lost 10 months, no doubt about it. And even if she had gone to court and a judge ruled in her favor, you'll never get awarded the full amount that you're owed if you're looking at more than 2, or like I said, 2.5 months. So you're not going to look in no situation are you going to get the full thing back. You're just looking for enough money to cover the loss of that 1 month's rent where you're turning it over and you're hustling to try and get somebody else in there and pick up back on a 1 year lease, which in this case it worked for her and it worked perfectly.
Yes. Yeah, and in addition to using this process for the security deposit, they also have created a little bit of a scoring system for applicants that I think includes a couple of really interesting things. They talk about applicants who are moving more than 30 miles away. So if her property is more than 30 miles away from where they currently live, they get less points, or they get points taken away, depending on how you want to put it. And then also, if they've been in that community for 5 years or more. So she's paying a lot of attention to ways that she can reduce the expected turnover, just by some of the stuff that we've talked about. Doing a good job of marketing your property, getting enough qualified applicants so that you can choose the best from that group. But taking it one step further, really looking at not just their work history and their criminal history, but also where they live. Are they from the community? Because if they're from the community, odds are they're going to stay there longer, and that seems to have been her experience as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for someone to learn from just true blue experience. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. This is somebody who's been doing it a long time and has noticed little things like that. And that's something that usually only comes from experience. She's been doing it long enough to know that, and you start to recognize that pattern, and you start saying, "Wait a minute, these people who are moving from farther away are way more likely to not fulfill their lease term." And so, yeah, it makes it into the screening process. And I've mentioned before, landlords come up with all kinds of funny stuff on their screening process. And as long as you're not discriminating against a protected class, that's perfectly acceptable. I mean,
Yeah.
again, we're always talking about finding the best fit. And, if part of your criteria is, listen, I want, somebody who's, like you mentioned, has been in the community for 5 years is going to score higher or rank higher in my scoring system, my screening criteria, versus somebody who's moving from out of town. Just based on my experience, I've had issues, perfectly okay. There's nothing, no issues, no problems with that. Landlord's not going to get in trouble for discriminating. And a lot of landlords have this misconceived notion that it's almost like a first come first serve. If somebody applies and they're qualified, you have to rent to them. You can't hold out and wait for more applicants or anything like that. Which is not true. You're looking for the best fit for your property. So, if you're getting a good response, don't be afraid to hold out. Wait until you get that winner that comes through, and you say, "This is it. This is the one that I've been looking for."
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting because in reading the article and seeing the things that she talks about and the way they've approached this, it goes back to what we've always talked about in terms of running this as a business. And one of the things they found by looking at the data in this particular vacancy that they were talking about, they found that their no pet policy was hurting demand for that unit significantly. They weren't getting as many applicants as they might if they allowed pets. But because of the type of property that it was, an up down unit, as they said, which I don't know. Being from California, I'm not sure what an up down unit is, but it
Upper
says,
lower. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
not much yard.
Right.
And so their decision was not to allow pets because they didn't feel the property was appropriate to it. But at least they took that information, they processed it, and they made a conscious decision not to increase the number of applicants just by allowing pets because they didn't feel that the property was appropriate. And that's a good, solid business decision. And sure, you can say, well, the best business decision would be to get more renters, but it goes against what you feel is best for that property. So, in my opinion, it's a really solid business decision, and it was made with the appropriate data, both in terms of determining that you would get more applicants and accepting that you won't have as many applicants, but you were doing what was right for the property.
Right. The last thing I'll mention on this, that she says in the article, and I'll read it directly as she wrote it because I think it's brilliant. And again, just a sign of really, a lot of experience as a landlord. She writes that she's taking into consideration their moving history and their address history, because she says that a prior experience indicates future experience. So someone who has moved a lot will likely to continue to move a lot. And landlords definitely have that on mind when they're signing a 1 or a 2 year lease. And I could tell you absolutely firsthand that that's true. When we see somebody who, you look into their address history and you see that they're usually good for 4 or 5 months at a place and then they're moving again. Um, you could usually safely assume that that's going to continue on as a pattern.
Yeah.
And so, that person may not score as high as someone who, clears through with the exact same, let's just say in a perfect world, they've got the exact same credit score and, you know, uh, whatever criteria that you're looking for, they meet it perfectly. And so the decision comes down to somebody who has been at their place for a long time versus somebody who has a history of moving around a lot. That stable person definitely looks a lot better. So, just holding out, waiting for your perfect tenant, I think is, that tenant avatar that we talked about before is is really what you got to keep an eye out for.
Yes. And then the other thing in terms of trying to minimize losses between tenants when somebody breaks their lease, it's important to be sure that you are prepared to market the property and begin accepting applications immediately. So as soon as somebody tells you they're moving out, or as soon as you find that the property is vacant, you need to be prepared to move forward quickly. You need to have all of your services in place so that you know who's coming in to do the handyman repairs that need to be done, who's doing the cleaning, who's doing the carpets, who's doing the landscaping, so that you can get those things scheduled and taken care of right away, and also have your marketing ready to go, so that as soon as you're ready to have people start to see the unit, you're ready to put that marketing out there and start to get people in, because every week you delay is money out of your pocket, because you're not going to be getting the rent for that period of time. So again, going back to operating this as a business, be sure that you have all of that stuff in a file ready to go. And as soon as you have to pull the trigger, you're ready to go, and you do it, and you lose as little time as possible. And Michelle talked about it here. They got enough interest in the property that she was speaking of that they had somebody move in, and they were able to refund 13 days of rent to the original tenant because they had the lease covered.
Right. Which, I mean, again, good landlord experience. You're never going to get a complaint back from a tenant, especially after breaking a lease. And there's the number one thing filed in landlord tenant court is security deposit disputes.
That
So
doesn't surprise me.
right. So you got a situation like this where the landlord is being above and beyond fair, and not only not operating at a loss, but is at a gain, and they're able to even refund back. So you're dealing with you're just being a good landlord on so many different levels, because you're avoiding the potentials of problems, you're covering your risk. So kudos to Michelle, good job.
Yes, very much so. Well, great, Stephen. I think that wraps up another episode of Night School. I look forward to talking to you tomorrow evening.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.